It is one of the most notorious assassinations in modern history. The murder of the Romanovs, Russia's ruling family. Once the subject of a high-stakes murder investigation.
What if one of history's most famous royal families didn't simply vanish into the shadows of revolution, but instead left behind a mystery so tangled that it took nearly a century, cutting-edge science, and relentless investigation to finally unravel it? For decades, whispers of survival echoed across continents. Stories surfaced of hidden identities, secret rescues, and heirs who may have slipped through the cracks of chaos. The truth, however, was buried, literally beneath layers of secrecy, political manipulation, and time itself. And when that truth finally began to emerge, it didn't just answer old questions. It exposed a far deeper story about power, fear, and the lengths people will go to erase history. At the center of this mystery stood the Romanov family, rulers of Russia for over 3 centuries, whose sudden and violent disappearance in the early 20th century shocked the world. When they were overthrown during the Russian Revolution, it marked not just the end of a dynasty, but the collapse of an entire way of life. Yet what followed their fall was not clarity, but confusion. Conflicting reports, missing bodies, and deliberate misinformation created fertile ground for speculation. People wanted to believe that at least one member of the family, especially the younger children, had somehow survived. For years, no one could confirm what had truly happened. The Soviet government released limited and often contradictory information, fueling suspicion rather than resolving it. In some cases, they even suggested that parts of the family might still be alive. This ambiguity allowed rumors to grow unchecked. Across Europe, individuals began stepping forward, claiming to be lost members of the Romanov lineage. Among them were several who insisted they were the youngest daughter, Anastasia, whose supposed escape became one of the most enduring legends of the 20th century. But beneath the myths and speculation, the truth lay hidden in a remote forest. It wasn't until decades later, in 1979, that a quiet but determined effort began to uncover what had been concealed for so long. A geologist named Alexander Avdonin, driven by historical accounts and persistent rumors, began searching an area near Yekaterinburg believed to hold the remains of the executed family. Under the guise of conducting routine geological work, he and his team located a shallow grave in a forest clearing. What they found was both significant and deeply unsettling. Buried beneath the earth were skeletal remains, fragmented, disordered, and degraded by time. The condition of the bones suggested not only a hurried burial, but also deliberate attempts to obscure their identity. There were no markers, no clear indications of who these individuals had been. Yet the possibility that these remains belonged to the Romanovs was too significant to ignore. The discovery sparked a new phase of investigation, one that would rely not on rumor or testimony, but on science. The remains were carefully excavated and sent for analysis. However, identifying them would prove to be a complex challenge. The bodies had been exposed to harsh environmental conditions, and in some cases, they had been burned or chemically treated in an apparent effort to destroy evidence. Traditional forensic methods were insufficient. But the bones alone could not tell their story with certainty. This is where modern DNA analysis became crucial. By the late 20th century, advancements in genetic science made it possible to extract and study DNA from even highly degraded remains. Scientists began applying these techniques to the bones found in the grave, hoping to determine not only who the individuals were, but how they were related to one another. One of the first steps involved analyzing nuclear DNA, using a method known as short tandem repeat testing. This allowed researchers to examine specific genetic markers and establish familial relationships among the remains. The results were striking. Among the skeletons, scientists identified a group that clearly formed a family unit: two adults and several children, all genetically linked. And alongside them were additional individuals who did not share the same genetic profile, suggesting they were likely servants or attendants who had been executed alongside the family. To strengthen their findings, researchers turned to mitochondrial DNA, which is passed down through the maternal line. This type of DNA is particularly useful for tracing ancestry across generations. By comparing the mitochondrial DNA from the remains to that of living relatives, scientists could confirm whether the individuals belonged to the Romanov lineage. One of the most significant breakthroughs came when they obtained a DNA sample from Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, a direct descendant of the Romanov family through the maternal line. When his DNA was compared to that extracted from the remains believed to belong to the Empress and her daughters, the match was undeniable. It provided strong evidence that these bones were indeed those of the imperial family. Identifying the male remains required a different approach. Since mitochondrial DNA cannot confirm paternal relationships, scientists had to locate living relatives connected through the male line. This proved more difficult, as not all potential relatives were willing to participate. Eventually, samples were obtained from distant relatives, and through careful comparison, researchers were able to confirm the identity of the last Russian Tsar. Despite these breakthroughs, the investigation was not yet complete. Two of the Romanov children were still missing from the grave. Their absence kept the mystery alive and left room for continued speculation. Had they escaped? Were the rumors of survival true after all? For years, our researchers searched for answers. Historical documents, including accounts from those involved in the execution, suggested that the missing children had been buried separately. Guided by these records, search efforts continued in the surrounding area. Then, in 2007, a second site was discovered, not far from the original grave. At this location, investigators found additional human remains, badly burned and fragmented, but consistent with the earlier accounts. Using more advanced DNA techniques than were available in the 1990s, scientists analyzed these new samples. This time, they employed a combination of mitochondrial DNA, autosomal DNA, and Y chromosome testing, which traces paternal lineage. The results were conclusive. The remains belonged to a young boy and a young woman, both genetically linked to the Romanov family. The boy was identified as Alexei, the long-missing heir to the throne. The young woman was confirmed to be one of his sisters. With this discovery, the final pieces of the puzzle fell into place. For the first time, there was complete scientific confirmation of what had happened to the Romanov family. All members had perished in 1918. The decades-long speculation about survivors, while compelling, was ultimately unfounded. Yet even with this evidence, controversy did not disappear. Questions were raised about the reliability of early DNA testing, the condition of the remains, and the possibility of contamination. Some critics pointed to unusual genetic variations as signs of error, while others questioned the transparency of the investigation. Religious and political factors also played a role. The Russian Orthodox Church, which later canonized the Romanovs as saints, was cautious in accepting the findings. They called for further verification and emphasized the importance of spiritual as well as scientific certainty. Meanwhile, the broader public, shaped by years of secrecy and misinformation, remained divided in their beliefs. Over time, however, Additional testing using improved technology confirmed the original conclusions. Independent laboratories analyzed the remains and reached the same results. While some skepticism persisted, the scientific consensus became increasingly clear. The eventual burial of the Romanov remains marked another significant chapter in this story. Decades after their deaths, they were laid to rest in a formal ceremony, attended by dignitaries and descendants. It was a moment of closure, but also reflection, a recognition of a tragic past that had long been obscured. Even so, the legacy of the Romanovs continues to spark debate. Disputes over lineage and symbolic leadership have emerged among distant relatives, each with their own claims and interpretations of history. While these debates no longer carry political power, they highlight the enduring fascination with a family whose story refuses to fade. In the end, what makes the Romanov mystery so compelling is not just the tragedy itself, but the layers of uncertainty that surrounded it for so long. It is a story of how truth can be hidden, reshaped, and rediscovered. A reminder that even the most carefully buried secrets have a way of coming to light, no matter how much time has passed.